Ivy McAllister folded her last dress into that battered old trunk, hand steady, jaw tight, eyes dry, while her own mother stood in the doorway laughing. Not crying, not apologizing, laughing. "At least the mountain man won't know what he's getting," her sister said. "Not until it's too late." Ivy closed the trunk. She didn't say a word. If this story hits somewhere deep, stay with me till the very end, and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning they sent Ivy McAllister away, the summer heat was already pressing down on Clover Ridge like a hand over a mouth. Heavy, suffocating, unrelenting. The kind of heat that made tempers short and truths shorter. But inside the McAllister house, it wasn't the heat that stole the air from the room. It was the silence Ivy carried with her. She had known for 3 days since her father, Edmund McAllister, had come home from the Silver Horn Saloon, smelling like whiskey and bad decisions, dropped a folded letter on the supper table and announced, not asked, announced, that she was to marry a man named Jack Riley. She hadn't read the letter herself. Her younger sister Clara had snatched it up first, read it aloud in a mocking voice, and dissolved into laughter before she even reached the second paragraph. "Jack Riley," Clara had repeated, savoring every syllable like it tasted funny. "That man lives alone on a ridge so far up the mountain, they say the mail rider refuses to go past the third switchback. Papa, you can't be serious." "Dead serious," Edmund had said, settling into his chair at the head of the table with the satisfied look of a man who believed he'd just solved a problem. "Riley's got land and livestock, and more silver in his account at Hendrick's Bank than most men in this county will see in 3 lifetimes. He put out word he's looking for a wife, someone to manage the house and keep him company." "And you volunteered Ivy?" Clara had said. Her mother, Vera, had pressed her lips together and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. "He doesn't know anyone in town," Edmund had said. "He won't know the difference." That had been 3 days ago, and Ivy had spent those 3 days listening to her family talk about her like she wasn't standing right there, like she was a piece of furniture they were deciding whether to keep or sell. And somewhere in those 3 days, something inside her had gone very, very quiet. Not broken, just quiet. She'd packed her trunk herself, washed and mended every piece of clothing she owned, polished her boots until they held a shine, and on the morning of the 4th day, she carried that trunk down the stairs alone, set it by the front door, and went to the kitchen to eat her breakfast. Her mother was already at the stove. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Vera said, without turning around, "You could at least try to look presentable." "I look fine, Mama." "You look like a farmhand." "I was a farmhand," Ivy said evenly, "for 4 years, while Clara was taking music lessons and going to socials. Somebody had to keep this family fed." Vera set down the spoon she was holding. "Don't start." "I'm not starting anything." Ivy took a slow sip of her coffee. "I'm finishing." Her mother turned then, and Ivy saw something flicker across her face. Something that might have been guilt, if Vera McAllister had been a woman who allowed herself guilt. But it passed quickly, replaced by the familiar, tight expression that meant the conversation was over. "The wagon leaves at 8, Vera said. "Don't make your father wait." Edmund had hired a boy named Colt Reeves, 17, gap-toothed and chatty, to drive the wagon up to Riley's property. Clara had come out on the porch to watch Ivy go, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. "You know what's funny?" Clara said. "I'm sure you'll tell me," Ivy replied, not looking up from securing the rope on her trunk. "Papa wrote to Riley and said he was sending his most accomplished daughter." Clara let out a little laugh. "Can you imagine the man's face when he sees you climb down off that wagon?" Ivy straightened. She looked at her sister, really looked at her, for what she understood might be the last time. And she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Pity. Not anger, not hurt. Just a long, bone-deep pity for a woman who had spent her whole life measuring people's worth by how they looked standing next to her. "Take care of yourself, Clara," Ivy said quietly. Something shifted in Clara's expression. Just for a second. Then she rolled her eyes and went back inside. Ivy climbed up onto the wagon seat beside Colt Reeves and did not look back at the house. The ride up the mountain took the better part of 3 hours. Colt talked for most of it. About the weather, about his cousin's new horse, about a card game he'd witnessed at the Silverhorn that had ended with someone getting a boot thrown at their head. Ivy let him talk. It was easier than thinking. The road narrowed as they climbed. The summer air changed, still warm, but cleaner, carrying the smell of pine and dry earth, and something wild underneath it all. The valley below fell away behind them, Clover Ridge shrinking until it was just a cluster of rooftops and dust. Ivy had never been this far up before. She'd lived her whole life at the foot of these mountains, looking up at them. She hadn't realized how different the world looked from up here. She was still looking out at the valley when Colt said, "That's the Riley place, ma'am." She turned. The property sat on a wide, flat section of the ridge, sheltered on 3 sides by a tree line of tall pines. The fence line was straight and solid. New posts, good wire. The kind of work that said the man who built it cared about doing things right. The barn was larger than she'd expected, doors open, a bay horse visible just inside. The house itself was modest, single story, front porch, stone chimney. But it was solid and clean and well kept in a way that told her a great deal about the man who lived in it. A man was standing at the fence. He wasn't looking at the wagon yet. He was working, mending a section of post, hammer in hand, moving with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done physical work his whole life and had made his peace with it. He was tall, broad through the shoulders. He wore his hat low against the sun, and she could see the line of his jaw from where she sat. Sharp, deliberate, the face of a man who didn't smile easily, but meant it when he did. Colt pulled the wagon to a stop near the gate. The man looked up. He looked at the wagon, at Colt, and then at Ivy. She met his gaze directly. She had decided, somewhere on that road up the mountain, that she would not look down, would not apologize for her appearance, would not shrink into herself the way her family had always expected her to. Whatever happened next, she would face it standing straight. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he set down his hammer, pulled off his work gloves, and walked toward the wagon. "You'd be Miss McAllister," he said. "I would," she said. "And you'd be Mr. Riley." "Jack," he said. He had a low, even voice, not unkind. "Nobody out here calls me Mr. anything." "Ivy, then," she said. He nodded once. Then he looked at Colt. "You need water for the horse before you head back down?" Colt blinked, clearly surprised to be acknowledged. Yes, sir. Thank you." "Trough's round back." Jack turned back to Ivy. "I'll get your trunk." "I can manage it." "I didn't say you couldn't." He moved to the back of the wagon with calm efficiency, lifted the trunk like it weighed nothing, and carried it toward the house. He paused at the porch steps and looked back over his shoulder. "You coming?" Ivy climbed down from the wagon. He set her trunk in the spare room off the hallway. Clean, simply furnished, a single window facing east. He showed her where things were without ceremony. The kitchen, the water pump, the woodpile, the outhouse, the root cellar. He spoke in plain sentences. No flourishes, no performance. Just information, delivered like a man who respected her enough not to waste her time. When the brief tour was finished, they were standing in the kitchen. He put a kettle on the stove without asking if she wanted coffee. "You hungry?" he said. "I'm all right," she said. Then, because it was true, "Thank you." He nodded. He pulled out a chair at the table and sat down, folding his hands in front of him, and looked at her with an expression that was direct without being rude. "I'm going to be straight with you, Miss Ivy," he said. "I've had 2 conversations with your father. Letters. He told me about you, and I told him what I needed. And here we are. But I think you and I should talk plain before we go any further." "I agree," she said, and sat down across from him. "I'm not a social man," he said. "I don't go to town much. I've got 200 acres, 200 head of cattle, and a workload that doesn't stop. I need a partner, someone who can run a house, who isn't afraid of hard work, who can make decisions without waiting to be told how. I'm not looking for decoration. I'm looking for—" He paused, seeming to choose his next word carefully. "A person who takes things seriously." "That's what my father told you he was sending?" Something in his expression shifted, a very slight tightening around the eyes. "More or less." Ivy laced her fingers together on the table. "And now that I'm here," she said carefully, "do you think that's what arrived?" He studied her for a moment. "I think," he said slowly, "that I don't make judgments about people on a first look. And I think the fact that you asked me that question directly, instead of waiting to see what I'd say first," he paused, "that tells me something." "What does it tell you?" "That you're not afraid of the answer." Ivy held his gaze. "My father sent me up here because he thought it was funny," she said. "You should probably know that. He thought sending me, the one daughter nobody in town would want, to a man who lives alone on a mountain and can't know any better. He thought that was a fine joke." My sister nearly fell off the porch laughing. Jack Riley didn't move. He didn't look away. His expression didn't change in the way she'd expected. No discomfort, no awkward apology, no rush to fill the silence with something kind and meaningless. He just looked at her, steady and level, for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you think?" She blinked. "What?" "I'm not interested in what your father thinks, or what your sister thinks." His voice was unhurried, calm as still water. "I'm asking what you think. Of yourself. Of this situation. Of being here." Ivy opened her mouth, closed it. It had been a very long time since anyone had asked her that. She wasn't sure anyone ever had. "I think," she said slowly, "that I am tired of being the one in my family who does the real work and gets treated like the least. I think I packed that trunk and rode 3 hours up a mountain in the heat, and I did not cry once. And I'm not going to start now." She met his eyes. "And I think that if you're a fair man who means what he just told me, that he wants a partner, not decoration, then maybe this situation is not as much of a joke as my father intended." Jack Riley was quiet for a moment. Then something happened to his face. Not a smile exactly, more like the thing that lives behind a smile. A recognition. "All right," he said. "I reckon we're going to get along fine." The kettle started to whistle. What Ivy had not expected, what no one in her family had thought to warn her about, or perhaps had not known, was that Jack Riley had a reputation on the mountain. She found this out from Martha Gaines, who ran the small dry goods store at the base of the North Trail, and who came by Riley's property twice a month with a supply wagon. Martha arrived 2 days after Ivy did, took one look at her, and said, "Well, you're not what I pictured." "I get that a lot," Ivy said. Martha was a stout woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes, and no patience for anything that wasted her time. She looked Ivy over the way a person looks at a piece of land they're considering buying. Assessing, calculating, making up her mind. Then she apparently made it up. "You want to know about the man you've married yourself to?" she said. "We're not married yet," Ivy said. "Not for another 2 weeks, assuming we both decide." "You'll decide," Martha said, with the confidence of someone who had seen how these things went. "Jack Riley's a fair man, stubborn as a post when he decides something, but fair. He's been on this mountain 9 years. Came up here with nothing, young, broke, fresh off some trouble back east that nobody talks about. And I've got enough sense not to ask. Built that fence himself, post by post. Built the barn himself. Grew that herd from 11 head." She paused, loading a crate onto the porch with practiced efficiency. "Half the men in Clover Ridge think he's strange because he doesn't come down to drink and jaw with them. The other half think he's arrogant because he doesn't need them." "And what do you think?" Ivy asked. Martha looked at her sideways. "I think he's a lonely man who's very bad at asking for help. And I think—" She lowered her voice slightly, though there was no one within earshot for a quarter mile in any direction, "that when he put out that letter looking for a wife, people thought it was odd. But I've seen the way that man works, and I think he just finally decided he didn't want to build something good and have nobody to share it with." Ivy was quiet for a moment. "My family sent me up here as a punishment," she said. Martha set down the crate. She turned and looked at Ivy with an expression that was not pity. Pity wasn't Martha Gaines's style, but something older and harder and more useful than pity. "Honey," she said, "the best things that ever happened to me in my life, somebody meant as an insult." She picked up the crate again. "Where do you want this?" That night, after supper, Ivy sat on the front porch in the cooling air and watched the valley below fill up with shadow. Behind her, through the open door, she could hear Jack moving around the kitchen, the quiet, methodical sounds of a man tidying up after himself, which had surprised her on the first night. She hadn't expected that. There were a lot of things about him she hadn't expected. She hadn't expected the way he worked, alongside her, not in front of her or behind her, but with her, like she was a capable person whose contribution mattered. She hadn't expected that when she'd made a decision about the kitchen stores without asking him, he'd looked it over and said, "Good thinking," and left it at that. No correction, no caveat, just acknowledgement, clean and simple. She hadn't expected to feel, on only the second day, like she was breathing in full for the first time in years. She heard him come to the door behind her. "Storm coming," he said. 3, maybe 4 days out. We'll need to get the south pasture fence checked before it hits." "I can do the east section," she said. "I know how to string wire." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father say anything else about you in those letters?" She felt her jaw tighten. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he seemed to choose his words with the same care he gave everything. "He described you a certain way. I want to know if it was accurate." "What did he say?" Silence. And then, deliberately, "He said you were plain and difficult, and that you'd never been able to hold a man's attention for more than 5 minutes." Ivy kept her eyes on the valley below. Her hands were very still in her lap. She had known, on some level, that this was what her family thought. She had known it for years. Hearing it said out loud, in those exact words, from the mouth of this man, who was mostly a stranger, it landed somewhere she hadn't fully armored. "And yet, here I am," she said, when she trusted her voice. 5 minutes gone, and you're still on the porch." Another silence. Longer this time. "Reckon I am," Jack said quietly. The dark settled around the mountain, and the first stars came out one by one, and Ivy McAllister sat on the porch of a life she hadn't chosen and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that she might just be exactly where she was supposed to be. She didn't know yet what was coming. She didn't know about the letter her father had already written, the second letter, the one that had nothing to do with her welfare and everything to do with his debt. She didn't know that Edmund McAllister's joke had been only partly a joke, and that the other part was a calculation. Send Ivy up the mountain, let her soften up a wealthy man, and then arrive later to collect. She didn't know any of that yet. She just sat in the cooling air and breathed. And for now, just for now, that was enough. The storm Jack had predicted came in fast and mean, the way mountain storms always did, not announcing themselves until they were already on top of you. It hit on the third day, and it hit hard. Ivy was in the barn when the sky cracked open, moving through the stalls with a bucket and a purpose, checking on the horses the way Jack had shown her, not just looking, but listening, paying attention to the small things that told you whether an animal was right or wrong. She'd taken to the barn work faster than she'd expected, faster than Jack had expected too, though he hadn't said so in words. She'd seen it in the way he'd stopped hovering near the stall door after the first morning, stopped offering instructions she didn't ask for, just watched, assessed, and stepped back. That meant more to her than a compliment would have. The rain came down in sheets, and the thunder moved through the walls of the barn like something alive, and Ivy stood in the middle of it all and felt, strangely, completely calm. She was still standing there when Jack came in from the south pasture, soaked through, pulling off his hat and shaking water from the brim. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke for a second. "Fence on the east line held," she said. "I saw," he said. "You did good work." "I told you I knew how to string wire." "You did." He hung his hat on the post and ran a hand through his wet hair. "I didn't doubt you." "You hesitated," she said. Not accusing, just stating a fact. He looked at her with that level expression she was starting to recognize as his version of being caught. "I did," he admitted. "Habit." "What kind of habit?" He was quiet for a moment, picking his words the way he always did, deliberately, like words cost something, and he intended to spend them wisely. "The kind that comes from people saying they can do something and then needing help halfway through," he said. "Nothing to do with you specifically." "But you adjusted," she said. "I adjusted," he agreed. She nodded once. They were standing 3 feet apart in a barn during a thunderstorm, both of them dripping. And there was something in that moment, something compact and real, that Ivy didn't have a word for yet. But she felt it, somewhere behind her sternum, like a door opening onto a room she hadn't known was there. Then the bay horse in the far stall kicked the wall hard and let out a sharp sound, and they both turned. Jack was across the barn in 4 strides. Ivy was right behind him. The horse had a stone lodged deep in the frog of her right front hoof, the kind of thing that could lame an animal if it went unattended. Jack worked the stone loose with a pick, while Ivy held the lantern and kept a hand on the mare's neck, talking to her low and steady. The horse calmed under her hand. Jack noticed. He didn't say anything, but he noticed. When it was done, he straightened up and looked at the horse and then at Ivy. "You've done that before." "Many times," she said. "We had 3 horses at home. Nobody else wanted the job." He was quiet for a beat. "How old were you when you started working the farm?" 14, she said, "after Papa's hired man left." Something moved across his face, quick and controlled, but there. "And your mother let that—" "My mother," Ivy said evenly, "has always found it easier to let things happen than to stop them." She handed him the lantern and stepped back from the stall. I'm not saying it to make you feel sorry for me. I'm saying it so you understand what I am. I'm not fragile. I'm not looking to be taken care of. I just want to be treated fairly." He set the lantern down on the post. He looked at her straight, the way he'd looked at her from the very beginning. Like she was a real person, saying real things, and both of those facts mattered to him. "That's all I'm asking for, too," he said. The rain hammered the roof. The horse exhaled softly behind them, and something that had been held very tight inside Ivy McAllister, something she'd been holding for years, maybe her whole life, loosened just slightly, just enough to let a little air in. The storm kept them off the land for 2 full days. Ivy had half expected that to be awkward. 2 near strangers stuck inside together, nothing to do but talk or sit in silence. But it wasn't. Jack Riley was not a man who filled silence with noise for the sake of it, and neither was she. And somehow, that made the silence between them comfortable rather than strained. He had books, more than she'd expected, a full shelf of them along the back wall of the main room, worn spines and dog-eared pages that said they'd been read, not just displayed. She asked him about one, and he talked about it for 10 minutes straight, more words than she'd heard from him in the previous 2 days combined. And she sat across from him and listened and thought, there he is. There's what's underneath the quiet. On the second afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee between them, and the rain still coming down outside, he said, "Tell me something about yourself that nobody knows." She looked up at him. "Why?" "Because I like knowing what's real," he said. "And most people lead with the things that aren't." She considered that. Then she said, "I keep a journal. Have since I was 12. I've filled 14 of them." She paused. "My mother found one once, when I was 16. She read half of it and then told me I was being dramatic and that nobody wanted to hear what I thought about things." Jack looked at her steadily. "What did you do?" "I finished the journal," Ivy said. "Started a 15th. Something in his eyes shifted. Just for a moment, quick as a flame and wind, and she recognized it as the expression of a man who had been told, at some point, something very similar about himself. That his thoughts didn't matter. That his voice took up too much space. She filed that away. "Your turn," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I can't abide cruelty. Any kind. Never could, since I was a boy. It's gotten me into more trouble than I can count." "What kind of trouble?" His jaw shifted. "The kind where you see someone being treated like they're worth less than nothing, and you can't just walk past it." She studied him. "That's not a flaw," she said. "That's a quality." "Depends on who's doing the counting," he said quietly. On the third morning, the storm broke. The land came back into itself, clean, bright, everything sharpened by 2 days of rain. They went back to work the way they'd fallen into a routine already, moving around each other in the yard and the barn and the kitchen, with a naturalness that surprised them both. Jack didn't explain every task to her anymore. She didn't ask permission before making decisions within her sphere. They were finding the shape of things. It was Martha Gaines who broke it. She arrived mid-morning on the 4th day, her supply wagon cutting up the trail fast, the horse blowing hard like she'd pushed it harder than usual. Ivy saw her coming from the yard, and something in the speed of it made her set down what she was doing. Martha pulled up, set the brake, and climbed down with her mouth already moving. "Word came up from town this morning," she said, without preamble. "Your father's been talking." Ivy went still. "Talking about what?" "About you." Martha's voice was flat and deliberate, the voice of a woman delivering something she'd rather not be carrying. "He's been telling people you forced this arrangement, that you went after Riley on your own, threw yourself at a man who didn't know any better, and that Riley's going to realize soon enough what he got himself into. She paused. He said it at the Silver Horn last night, loud enough that 6 men heard it. It'll be all over town by supper. Ivy felt the ground shift under her feet. Not fear, not embarrassment. Something colder and more specific. The particular fury of a woman who has been lied about by someone who owes her better, and knows there is nothing she can do to stop the lie from moving. He's setting up the story, she said, almost to herself. So when he comes here, he's already coming, Martha said. Tom Reeves, Colt's father, saw Edmund ride out this morning, heading for the North Trail. He's got a man with him, name of Garrett Walsh. Walsh works for the Clover Ridge Land Office. Ivy looked at her. The Land Office. Yes, Martha held her gaze. Edmund McAllister has been in debt to the County Land Board for 11 months. They've been threatening to call it due. She paused. Riley's got 200 acres free and clear. Prime mountain land, spring-fed, surveyed clean. The cold thing in Ivy's chest got colder. My father sent me up here to soften the man up, Martha said quietly. To get a foot in the door. And then to arrive with Walsh and whatever paper Walsh has been cooking up in that office, and use your presence here, your relationship with Riley, as leverage. The world rearranged itself around Ivy in about 4 seconds. Every piece of it clicked into place, and the sound it made was ugly. Her father hadn't sent her here as a joke. Or not only as a joke. He'd sent her here as a tool. Get the plain daughter off his hands. Let her make herself useful in the meantime, and then show up later to collect, using her marriage to a wealthy man as the crowbar to pry open that man's land title. She had been a joke and a chess piece at the same time, and she hadn't seen it. She was still standing with that realization moving through her like cold water when she heard Jack's boots on the porch behind her. Martha, he said. Then he looked at Ivy's face, and his voice changed. What happened? She told him straight, all of it, exactly as Martha had said it, without softening any part of it. She owed him that. She owed him the truth, the same way she'd want it if the situation were reversed. Clean and direct, without ceremony. He listened without interrupting. His face did what it always did when something mattered. Went very still, very focused, like he was measuring every word before adding it to whatever he was building in his mind. When she finished, the silence lasted long enough that Martha shifted her weight on the wagon step. Then Jack said, He's using you as leverage. Yes, Ivy said. Did you know? The question was quiet, not accusatory, just honest. He needed to know, and he was asking her directly, and she would answer the same way. No, she said. I knew he thought it was funny to send me. I didn't know there was money behind it. She met his eyes. I swear to you on anything you want that I didn't know. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, and she understood that the question was closed. He'd asked it because he needed to, and she'd answered it because he deserved it, and now they were on the same side of it. How far out is he? Jack asked Martha. Tom Reeves said he left Clover Ridge at first light, Martha said. Figure he's 2 hours behind me, maybe less. Walsh have paperwork with him? Tom couldn't see clearly, but Walsh doesn't make social calls. Jack was quiet for another moment. Then he said, All right. He looked at Ivy. Here's what I need to know. When your father gets here, and he will get here, and he'll have his argument ready, what do you want to do? She stared at him. What do I want? It's your family, he said. Your name tied up in it. Your call. She hadn't expected that either. She hadn't expected to be the one making the call. Every man she'd known before Jack Riley would have handled it himself, made the decision, dealt with the situation, and told her about it afterward, or not at all. "I want to be there," she said. "I want to face him myself." "Then you will be," he said simply. He looked at Martha. "Can you stay?" "Wouldn't miss it," Martha said. The 2 hours passed the way time passes when something is coming, both too slow and too fast, stretched and compressed at the same moment. Ivy moved through the yard, doing small tasks she didn't need to do, her hands busy, her mind burning. She kept turning it over, every conversation with her father over the past 3 days before she'd left, looking for the seams of it, the places where the calculation had showed through the performance of parental authority. She found them everywhere, now that she knew what she was looking for. The way he'd asked, very casually, how much land the letter had said Riley owned. The way Walsh had been at the house the week before. She'd thought nothing of it at the time. A routine visit, county business. The way her mother had said so carefully, "Don't make enemies up there, Ivy. Be agreeable. Not be safe, be happy, be yourself. Be agreeable. Be useful." She was standing at the fence, jaw tight, hands on the top rail, when Jack came up beside her. "You're doing it again," he said. "Doing what?" "Carrying something alone that doesn't have to be carried alone." She turned and looked at him. There was something in his face that she hadn't seen directed at her before, from any man. Not pity, not impatience, but a plain and steady regard that said, "I see you. I'm here. You don't have to pretend." "I just keep thinking," she said, "that I should have known. That I was so relieved to be out of that house, so relieved to be somewhere I could breathe. That I didn't stop to ask why, exactly, a man who never did anything for my benefit was doing something that looked like it was for my benefit." "You wanted to believe it was real," he said. "That's not an excuse." "It's not an excuse," he agreed. "It's just what people do when they've been told their whole lives that they don't deserve anything." He paused. "They take the first thing that looks like a gift without asking what it costs." She felt that land in her chest, somewhere deep and specific. "He's going to try to use me against you," she said. "He's going to walk in here and say that I'm his daughter, and that my presence here gives him some kind of standing, some kind of claim." "He can try," Jack said. His voice was still even, still calm, but there was something underneath it now, something with edges. "But here's the thing about claims, Ivy. They only work if the person being claimed hasn't already decided otherwise." She looked at him. "You came up here of your own will," he said. "You've been here 6 days. You've worked this land and made decisions on it and earned your place on it. Whatever paper Walsh has in his coat, it doesn't change what's real. And what's real is that you're here, and you're not your father's property, and this land is mine, and I will stand in my own yard and say so to whoever needs to hear it." Ivy McAllister looked at Jack Riley for a long moment. Something had changed in the 6 days since she'd climbed down off that wagon. Something she was only now naming, here, at this fence, with the afternoon light long and warm and the sound of a wagon coming up the trail in the distance. She wasn't the woman her family had sent up here anymore. She wasn't sure she was even the same woman who'd packed that trunk and rode 3 hours without crying. She was something new, something that hadn't had a name before, but was starting to. "They're here," Martha called from the porch. Ivy turned toward the trail. Her father's wagon was cresting the last rise, dust rising behind it, a second man riding alongside, broad, suited, with a particular self-satisfied bearing of a man who carried official papers and believed that made him powerful. Ivy's hands dropped from the fence rail. She straightened her spine, rolled her shoulders back, lifted her chin. "Ready?" Jack said beside her. "Been ready," she said. "My whole life." Edmund McAllister climbed down from that wagon like a man who believed the ground belonged to him before his boots hit it. He was heavy-set, red-faced from the ride, wearing his good coat despite the heat. The kind of man who dressed for the impression he intended to make, not for the conditions he was actually in. He smoothed his lapels, looked around the property with slow, appraising eyes, and then found Ivy standing by the fence. He smiled. It was the smile she'd grown up watching. Wide, warm, entirely without substance. The smile her father wore when he wanted something and believed he was going to get it. "Ivy, sweetheart," he said. "You're looking well." She didn't move toward him. "Papa." He came forward anyway, arms opening like he expected an embrace. She let him get within 5 feet, and then he seemed to register something in her posture. The stillness of it, the set of her jaw, and he stopped. The smile stayed on his face, but shifted slightly, recalibrated. "Long ride up," he said, glancing at Jack. "You'd be Riley." "I would," Jack said. "Edmund McAllister." He extended his hand. "Ivy's father. Came up to check on my girl, see how she's settling in. A father worries, you understand." Jack shook the hand once, brief and businesslike. "Garrett Walsh," he said, looking past Edmund to the second man, who had dismounted and was straightening his jacket with the careful movements of someone who ironed his clothes and thought that mattered. "You work for the county land office." Walsh looked momentarily surprised that Jack knew his name. He recovered fast, professional reflex, and nodded. "That's right. I'm here in an unofficial capacity, purely as there's no unofficial capacity for a land office man," Jack said. "When a land office man makes a trip, he brings paperwork. So let's not pretend otherwise." Walsh's mouth closed. He glanced at Edmund. Edmund's smile tightened at the edges. He turned back to Jack with the air of a man changing tactics, without admitting he'd been using one. "We just want a conversation, Riley. That's all. A simple, friendly conversation between neighbors." "We're not neighbors," Jack said. "You live 30 miles south and 3,000 feet down. And you didn't write ahead. Didn't want to trouble you. Showing up unannounced is more trouble than a letter," Jack said. "Come inside if you want water. Then say what you came to say." Martha Gaines was inside, seated at the kitchen table with a coffee cup and an expression that said she was enjoying herself in a grim, particular way. Edmund saw her, and his eyes flickered. Recognition, calculation, displeasure, all in the space of half a second. "Martha," he said flatly. "Edmund," she said, equally flat. "Long way to come to check on a daughter you didn't bother checking on for the last 4 years." "Martha," Ivy said, not unkindly. "Just noting," Martha said, and went back to her coffee. Walsh set his leather satchel on the table with the deliberate weight of a man making a statement. Edmund sat down across from Jack, laced his hands together, and dropped the pretense of the warm father with a speed that told Ivy it had never been anything more than a costume. "Here's the situation," Edmund said. "Riley, you've got a good piece of land here. Good water, good grass, prime survey. I've had my eye on the northern ridge section, the 240 acres above your fence line, for some time." "That land is mine," Jack said. "It's been mine for 9 years. The deed is in my name, and it's been filed in 3 counties. "It was filed," Walsh said, opening his satchel, "under a survey that has since been challenged." He produced a document, set it on the table, turned it to face Jack. "The original survey was conducted by a Tomas Verity in 1867. Verity's license was revoked in 1871 for irregularities in 6 separate surveys across Harlan County. That revocation retroactively invalidates any deed filed under his name." Silence. Jack looked at the document. His face did not change. But Ivy, standing to his right, saw his hand on the table, the slight tension in the knuckles, and understood that this was not entirely news to him. Or if it was, he was faster at absorbing a blow than any man she'd ever seen. "That's a document Walsh drafted himself," Martha said from her corner, not looking up. "I'd want to know who signed off on it." "It was signed by County Commissioner Beaumont Haig," Martha said, "who has been Edmund McAllister's drinking companion every Thursday for the past 3 years. Yes, I know. I hear things in my store. People forget I'm there." She set down her coffee cup. "Funny how documents that challenge 9-year-old land titles appear right when a man's got debt calling." Edmund's eyes cut to Martha with something in them that wasn't friendly. "Nobody asked for your opinion." "Nobody asked for bad weather either," Martha said. "Still happens." "Walsh's document is legitimate. Then file it in court," Jack said. The room went quiet. Jack's voice hadn't risen, hadn't sharpened. It was the same even tone he used for everything. Discussing fence lines, discussing books, telling her the storm was 3 days out. But there was something beneath it now, solid as bedrock, and it stopped Edmund's next sentence before it started. "If that survey challenge is legitimate," Jack said, "file it in the Harlan County Courthouse, and I'll respond through my attorney. That's how legal processes work." He looked at Walsh. "You know that. You work for the county. Which means you also know that showing up at a private property with a challenged document and no court order isn't a legal proceeding. It's a threat." Walsh said nothing. "So if you're here with a legal challenge," Jack continued, "the conversation is over until we're standing in front of a judge. And if you're here with a threat—" He let that sit for a moment. "Then I'd like to know what exactly you think you're threatening me with." Edmund leaned forward. The warmth was completely gone now. This was the man Ivy had seen in glimpses all her life. The one behind the smile. The one who appeared when the smile stopped working. "I'll tell you what I'm threatening you with," Edmund said. "I'm threatening you with a very simple fact. My daughter is on your property. She's here at my arrangement, at my goodwill. And the moment I withdraw that goodwill, the moment I choose to tell every person in this county that you took a young woman under false pretenses, that you used the promise of marriage to get her up here, and then failed to honor—" "Papa." Ivy's voice came out quieter than she intended. Quieter and harder. Edmund looked at her. "Stay out of this, Ivy." "No," she said. Just that. One word, but the way she said it, flat and final, with no apology attached, made her father blink. "I said stay, and I said no." She stepped forward, moving to stand beside Jack's chair rather than behind it. "I've been staying out of things my whole life. Standing back while you made decisions about me, talked over me, sent me where it was convenient. Used what I did to cover what you didn't do. I'm not standing out of this, Papa. I'm standing right in the middle of it." Edmund stared at her. She saw something shift in his face. The bully's instinct recalculating, trying to find the angle. "You don't understand what's at stake," he said, in a quieter voice now, almost gentle. "The debt, Ivy. They're going to take the house. Your mother, your sister—" "Don't," she said. "They'll have nothing. After everything we've done for you, don't use them," she said, and her voice cracked just slightly on the word, not from weakness, but from the specific anguish of a woman watching her family weaponize the people she loves. "Don't put Mama and Clara in this like they're yours to move around. They are mine too. I'm not," she said. "Whatever I was before, I'm not anymore." The silence that followed that was different from the others. This one had weight to it. And in that weight, Ivy felt the full breadth of what she was doing. Not just defying her father in a kitchen argument, but cutting a tether. The kind that, once cut, didn't reconnect. She felt it like a physical thing, and she did not step back. Walsh broke it. He pulled a second document from the satchel and set it on the table with a precision that told Ivy this had been planned. The first document to soften the ground, the second to plant the flag. "This is a deed transfer proposal," he said. His voice was careful now, stripped of its earlier official bluster. "Voluntary conveyance of the Northern Ridge parcel, the 160 acres above your current fence line, to the Clover Ridge Land Development Collective. In exchange, the survey challenge is dropped, and the title on your remaining acreage is confirmed, clean, and permanent." He slid it across the table toward Jack. Jack didn't touch it. He looked at Walsh, then at Edmund, then back at Walsh. "Who is the Clover Ridge Land Development Collective?" he said. Walsh hesitated just long enough. "Who is it?" Jack said again. "It's a consortium of—" "I'll tell you who it is," Martha said, standing up from her chair for the first time. "It's Edmund McAllister, Beaumont Haig, and 2 men from the Railroad Survey Office who've been sniffing around the northern ridges for 18 months because the Denver Pacific Line is running a spur north. And anyone who owns land in that corridor, when they break ground, is going to see that land triple in value inside of 2 years." She looked at Edmund. "That's what this is. That's what it's always been. Not debt collection. Land speculation. And you needed a foot in the door." The look Edmund gave Martha was the look of a man who had just watched his winning hand get turned face up on the table. "That's," he started. "True," Martha said. "Every word of it. I had Tom Hendricks pull your account records last week, Edmund. You've been paying down that county debt since March. You're not in the kind of trouble that requires stealing a man's land. You're in the kind of trouble that requires more land. Specifically, land in that rail corridor." Walsh was already reaching for his documents. Jack put one hand flat on the table. "Leave those," Jack said. Walsh froze. "Those documents came into my house," Jack said. "They stay in my house until my attorney has looked at them." He looked at Walsh with the steady, unapologetic directness of a man who had built something with his own hands and was not going to have it taken by a man with a briefcase. "You can have copies made at the courthouse. I'll send for my lawyer in the morning." Walsh looked at Edmund. Edmund stood up slowly. His face had gone through several colors, red, pale, red again, and now it had settled into something Ivy recognized. Not anger, not defeat. It was the look of a man who had lost the hand he thought he'd stacked, but was already looking for the next table. He turned to Ivy. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You understand that? You are making a mistake that your family will not forget." "I know," she said quietly. "Your mother is going to be fine," Ivy said. "Because whatever you've told her about why you came up here today, she doesn't know all of it. She wouldn't have let you use me like this if she'd known all of it." She held her father's gaze. "I know, Mama. She loves poorly and protects badly, but she's not this. And when she finds out what you came here to do—" She stopped. "She deserves to know what you came here to do." Something moved behind Edmund's eyes. For 1 second, just one, she saw it. Not guilt, exactly. Something older and more complicated than guilt. The expression of a man who had been telling himself the story of his own necessity for so long that he had forgotten there were other stories. Then it closed. His face hardened back to its familiar shape. "You've always been ungrateful," he said. "I've always been used," she said. "That's not the same thing." He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he turned, nodded at Walsh, and moved toward the door. He stopped at the threshold, didn't turn around. "The survey challenge is real," he said. "Walsh may have his angles, but the Verity revocation is on record. You'll want that lawyer, Riley. Sooner rather than later." He walked out. Walsh followed, satchel under his arm, the defeated efficiency of a man who had run this play before and was already recalculating for the next one. The door closed behind them. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Martha exhaled slowly and sat back down. "Well," she said. "That could have gone worse." "Could have gone better," Jack said. "Most things could." She looked at Ivy. "You all right?" Ivy realized she'd been holding herself very straight for the last 20 minutes and hadn't noticed until now. She felt it in her shoulders, in the back of her jaw. She made herself release it, muscle by muscle. "I'm all right," she said. "I will be." Jack pushed back his chair and stood. He moved to the door, opened it, and watched his property's gate until the sound of the 2 horses faded down the trail. Then he turned back to the room. "Martha," he said, "the railroad survey. How sure are you?" "Sure enough," she said. "Tom Hendricks has a cousin in the Denver Pacific Land Office. It's not public yet, but the route's been set for 8 months. Anyone who owns in the Northern Ridge Corridor between here and Cutter Pass is going to get a very interesting letter inside of 18 months. Jack nodded slowly. He looked at Ivy. "He wasn't entirely wrong," he said. "The verity issue. It's been sitting in the background for years. Something I always told myself I'd deal with, and then didn't, because the title had never been challenged." He paused. "I should have dealt with it." "You can deal with it now," Ivy said. "I can," he said. "It'll take a few months and cost some money, and it'll hold up fine in court, because Walsh's document is a piece of theater dressed up in official language." He looked at her steadily. "What I want to know is what happens with your family after today." She was quiet for a moment. "My father is going to go home," she said, "and tell my mother a version of this that makes him look reasonable and me look difficult. Clara will believe him. My mother," she paused, "my mother might not, if she thinks about it long enough." "And if she does think about it?" "Then maybe she writes me a letter," Ivy said. "Or maybe she doesn't." "Does that—" He stopped, started again. "Does that hurt?" She looked at him. This man who asked her what she thought, who put her name on decisions, who stood beside her instead of in front of her. She thought about what Martha had said that first day. A lonely man who's very bad at asking for help. She thought Jack Riley was not bad at asking for help at all. She thought he'd just spent a very long time in a world that didn't offer any, and had learned to carry everything alone because that was the only option available to him. Until now. "Yes," she said honestly. "It hurts. It's always going to hurt a little. Because they're my family. And you don't stop wanting things to be different just because you've accepted that they won't be." She held his gaze. "But hurting and being broken aren't the same thing. I've known that for a long time." Jack was quiet for a moment. "I know it too," he said. Martha stood up, collecting her coffee cup with the air of a woman who had witnessed enough and was choosing, with great diplomacy, to give 2 people some space. "I'll come by Thursday with the usual supplies," she said, moving toward the door. She paused and looked at Ivy. "For what it's worth, watching you stand there and say what you said to that man." She shook her head slightly. "Took me 30 years and 2 husbands to find that kind of steady." Then she was out the door, and the sound of her wagon was retreating down the trail. And it was just Ivy and Jack in the kitchen. The late afternoon light long through the window, the house quiet around them. He was still looking at her. "What?" she said. "I'm just—" He stopped. "What?" she said again, softer. "I'm trying to remember the last time someone stood next to me like that," he said quietly. "Like we were on the same side of the same thing, without me having to ask." His jaw shifted. "I don't think it's ever happened before." Ivy felt something move through her, slow and warm and completely outside her control. The thing behind the sternum that had been opening door by door since the morning she'd climbed down off that wagon. "Well," she said quietly, "get used to it." He looked at her for one more long moment. Then, the bay horse out in the barn let out a sharp, alarmed cry. Sudden, loud, the sound an animal makes when something is wrong. And they both turned toward the door at the same instant. Because something was wrong. It wasn't until Jack had the barn door open and Ivy was right behind him that she saw it. Not the horse, not an animal, not the storm returning. It was Colt Reeves, the gap-toothed boy who'd driven her up the mountain 2 weeks ago, sitting on a spent horse, face pale, holding an envelope with shaking hands. "Mr. Riley," he said, out of breath. "Miss McAllister." He held out the envelope. "Walsh sent me. Said you'd want to see this before morning." Jack took the envelope. He opened it. He read it. And the expression that moved across his face, controlled, contained, but there, unmistakably there, was not the face of a man who had just received good news. He handed it to Ivy without a word. She read it. The Verity revocation was real. Walsh hadn't manufactured it. He'd found it and used it. And the document in her hand was a certified copy from the State Land Board, dated 6 weeks prior, bearing 3 official signatures. Jack's deed was not invalid. Not yet. But it was being contested by someone with the legal standing to contest it. Someone who was not Edmund McAllister. Someone whose name she had never heard before. Someone who had, apparently, been waiting 9 years for exactly this moment. The name on the document was Daniel Voss. Ivy read it twice, then a third time, the way you read something you're hoping will change if you look at it long enough. It didn't change. The letters stayed in the same order, bearing the same meaning, attached to the same certified state seal that made it real, in a way that Edmund McAllister's theater had never quite managed to be. She looked up at Jack. His face was doing the thing it did when something hit him hard, going absolutely still, everything locked down, processing in a silence that looked like calm, but wasn't. She'd learned to read the difference in the last 2 weeks, the stillness that meant nothing was wrong, and the stillness that meant something was very wrong, and he was deciding what to do about it. This was the second kind. "You know that name," she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer right away. He took the document back from her, folded it once, and held it in both hands like he was deciding whether to keep it or burn it. Colt Reeves was still sitting on his spent horse, watching them with the wide-eyed attention of a 17-year-old who understood he was in the middle of something large. "Go on back down, Colt," Jack said. "Tell Walsh the document was received." "Walsh said to wait for a reply." "The reply is that the document was received," Jack said. "Go on." Colt went. They stood in the barn doorway until the sound of the horse faded, and then Jack turned and walked back inside the house without a word. And Ivy followed him, because there was no version of this where she didn't follow him. He sat down at the kitchen table, set the document in front of him, looked at it. "Jack," she said, "who is Daniel Voss?" The silence lasted long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he exhaled slowly, the sound of a man releasing something he'd been holding in his chest for a very long time. "He's the man I bought this land from," Jack said. 9 years ago. Ivy sat down. "Then he sold it to you. The title passed. That's not a contest. He sold it to me for $400, Jack said, which was every cent I had, and then some. And he signed the deed in front of 2 witnesses and a notary in Harlan County, and I filed it the same afternoon." He paused. What he didn't tell me was that the land wasn't entirely his to sell. Half of it, the Northern Ridge parcel, the same section Walsh wants, was held jointly with his brother, a man named Clement Voss. Clement was out east at the time, had been for 3 years, and Daniel said there was no one to contact and the land was his to dispose of. "And Clement Voss?" Ivy said. "Died in 1869, Jack said, 2 years after I bought the land. And when he died, his half of the northern parcel passed to his son, Daniel's nephew. He looked at the document. Daniel Voss. Ivy stared at him. The same Daniel Voss. The same. His voice was flat. Not bitter, just flat. The way a fact is flat when it's been sitting in the back of your mind for years, waiting for the day it becomes somebody else's leverage. He waited until he needed money. That's what this is. He doesn't want the land. He wants what it's worth. The same thing Walsh wants. The same thing your father wants. He stopped. Everybody wants the railroad money. How long have you known? She said. He looked at her. How long have you known the northern parcel had a potential claim on it? She said carefully. Another silence. Longer this time. 4 years, he said. Ivy felt that land differently than she'd expected. Not anger. Something more complicated. The particular ache of watching a person you've started to trust reveal a place where they'd been less than honest, and understanding that the dishonesty came from fear rather than malice, which somehow made it harder rather than easier. You built the fence, she said slowly. The new posts, the good wire. You built the fence on the south side of the northern parcel. Yes. Because if the claim ever came, you wanted the land clearly improved, clearly occupied, clearly worked. Yes. And you never told anyone. No. He met her eyes. I kept thinking I'd resolve it quietly, buy out the claim before it became public. I made contact with Daniel Voss 3 years ago, offered him fair money for a quitclaim deed. He said he'd think about it. His jaw tightened. He thought about it for 3 years, and then Walsh came to town, and apparently Walsh found him before I did. Ivy was quiet for a moment, turning it over. The shape of it. The 9 years of building something and carrying this underneath it, alone. You should have told someone, she said. I know, he said. You should have told me, she said, before today, even just today, before my father walked in here. You should have told me there was a real legal vulnerability, not just Walsh's theater. I know, he said again, and the way he said it, not defensive, not explaining, just accepting, told her that he'd known it even as he was not doing it, and that the knowing hadn't been enough to make him act. She recognized that. She recognized the particular paralysis of a person who had carried something alone for so long that sharing it felt like a surrender they didn't know how to make. All right, she said. He looked at her. All right? All right, she said again. You made a mistake. Now we deal with what's in front of us. She reached across the table and pulled the document toward her. Daniel Voss is making a claim on the northern parcel. Walsh has connected his claim to the survey challenge so they look like one problem when they're actually two. Separate them and they're both weaker. Jack was watching her with an expression she'd seen once before. The recognition in the barn, during the storm, when she'd known how to read a horse. Like she'd done something he hadn't expected, and the unexpectedness of it had settled something in him. You think like a lawyer, he said. I think like a woman who spent 4 years managing a farm and a household while her father made bad decisions, she said. Which is similar, but cheaper. She looked at the document. Who's your attorney? Man named Briggs in Harlan County. Howard Briggs. Then we ride to Harlan County in the morning. It's a 4-hour ride. Then we leave early, she said. Unless you've got a better idea. He didn't. They left before dawn. Martha had stayed the night in the spare room, her own suggestion, not theirs, announced without ceremony as she made up the bed herself. And she stood on the porch in the gray pre-dawn and handed Ivy a canvas sack with food in it and said, Howard Briggs is a good man, but he talks for 3 hours about everything. Don't let him. How do you know Howard Briggs? Ivy said. I know everyone, Martha said. Go. The ride down the mountain in the early dark was different from the ride up. Ivy knew the trail now, knew the switchbacks and the places where the rock came close to the edge and where the pines thinned and the valley opened up below. She rode beside Jack rather than behind him, and they talked in the quiet, steady way of two people who had moved past the stage of choosing their words carefully and into the stage of just saying what was true. He told her about Daniel Voss, the whole story this time, without the gaps. A man he'd met in a rooming house in Missouri. A man who'd seemed decent and had needed money fast and had offered the land at a price that was below its value even then, which Jack had taken as good fortune and now recognized as the first sign that something wasn't right. The notary in Harlan County who'd processed the deed so quickly that Jack, 22 years old and inexperienced and so desperate for land of his own that he hadn't asked enough questions. I've replayed it 1,000 times, he said. What I should have asked. What I should have verified. You were 22, she said. Old enough to know better. Nobody's old enough to know everything at 22, she said. If they were, the world would have a lot fewer 40-year-old men with regrets. She looked at him sideways. What happened back east that Martha said nobody talks about? He was quiet for a long moment. My father, he said finally. He was not a good man, and when I was old enough to leave, I left. And when I left, I decided I was going to build something that was mine, that no one had given me and no one could take back. Something I'd made with my own hands from nothing. He paused. Voss was the first piece of that. The land was the first thing I'd ever owned. Ivy absorbed that, the weight of it. 9 years, alone on a mountain, building that first piece of himself into something real. Nobody took it yet, she said. Not yet, he agreed. And they're not going to, she said. He looked at her. In the early morning gray, with the valley coming up below them, his face was open in a way she hadn't seen before. The careful containment loosened by the dark and the road, and 2 weeks of something accumulating between them that neither of them had named yet. You're very certain for someone who just found out about all this last night, he said. I'm certain about you, she said simply, and I've decided that counts for something. Howard Briggs was a small, energetic man with an office full of stacked paper and the particular focused intensity of someone who had spent 30 years solving problems that other people had made. He read the Walsh document, then the Voss claim, then asked Jack 12 rapid questions, then sat back and tapped his desk 3 times with one finger, the way a man does when he's landed on something. Walsh's survey challenge is theater, he said. I've known about the Verity revocation for 2 years, and I can tell you that of the 6 surveys he conducted in this region, 3 have been challenged, and all 3 were upheld on the basis of corrected resurvey. We file a resurvey request Monday. It's resolved in 60 days, and Walsh's document is worth exactly the paper it's printed on. And the Voss claim? Jack said. Briggs was quiet for just long enough. The Voss claim is real, he said. Clement Voss did hold a partial interest in the northern parcel, and that interest did pass to his son Daniel on Clement's death in 1869. That part is documented and legitimate. Ivy watched Jack absorb that, the slight tightening in his jaw. However, Briggs said, and something in his voice changed, taking on the quality of a man who has found the seam in something. Daniel Voss has known about this claim for 9 years. He knew it when his uncle died. He has made no legal move to assert it in 9 years, during which time Jack Riley has continuously, openly, and exclusively occupied and improved the land. He looked at them both. In the state of Colorado, a claimant who sits on a known interest for more than 7 years without assertion is subject to adverse possession challenges. The clock on Daniel Voss's claim may already have run. Ivy looked at Jack. She saw it cross his face. Not relief yet, too early for that, but something loosening. A breath let out. May have, Jack said. May have, Briggs confirmed. It depends on whether Voss can argue he was unaware of the claim. Given his father's death is a matter of public record, and the land title was filed in his uncle's name in the same county where Voss has lived his entire adult life. He shook his head. It's going to be a hard argument to make. Can Walsh use the Voss claim as leverage? Ivy said. Briggs looked at her with the expression of a man recalibrating who in the room was asking the important questions. Walsh can file it alongside the survey challenge to muddy the water, he said. Make it look like the title is fundamentally compromised. That's the strategy. Not to win in court, but to make the threat of court expensive and exhausting enough that Riley signs over the parcel to make it stop. That's not going to happen, Ivy said. Briggs looked at her, then at Jack. Your wife? He said. Not yet, Jack said, but she speaks for me. Briggs nodded once, as if that settled it. Then here's what we do. They were 3 hours with Briggs. When they walked out of his office, the sun was high, and the town of Harlan County was full of its midday noise and movement, and Ivy felt the particular kind of exhausted that comes not from physical work, but from holding your mind at full tension for hours. Jack bought them both coffee at the counter of a dry goods store, and they sat on the bench outside and didn't talk for a few minutes. Just let the noise of the town move around them. He can win this, Ivy said, finally. Briggs thinks so, Jack said. I trust Briggs. But, she said, because there was a but in his voice. But winning takes time, he said. And while it's being won, Walsh is going to keep pushing. He knows the railroad timeline. He knows if he can pressure me into a deal before the spur route goes public, he can get the land for a fraction of what it'll be worth. He looked at his coffee. And he's got your father. And your father has got a very particular kind of patience when there's money involved. Ivy was quiet for a moment. My father is going to come back, she said. Yes. And next time, he'll try a different angle. Yes. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. He's going to try through my mother, she said. That's what I would do in his position. He knows I'd close the door on him directly. But Mama, if he tells her the right version of this, she'll write me a letter. She'll make it about family, about loyalty, about what I owe them. She stopped. And I love my mother. Whatever she is and whatever she's allowed, I love her. And my father knows that. Jack was looking at her steadily. What do you want to do? He said. Not, what should we do, or here's what I think. The same question he'd asked her in the yard, before Edmund had come through the gate. What do you want to do? She looked at him, this man who had built something from nothing, and carried it alone, and made one mistake and built the rest of it right. This man who was standing beside her rather than in front of her, and asking her what she wanted, like her answer mattered, because to him it did. I want to write to my mother first, she said, before my father does. I want her to hear what happened here, from me, not from him. And I want her to know. She stopped, steadied herself. I want her to know she can come here, if it ever comes to that there's a room, and she's welcome. Whatever she decides about my father is her decision, but she should know the door is open. Jack was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. The man you're being right now, he said slowly. The way you're thinking. Clear, fast, no wasted motion. Standing in that kitchen yesterday, like you'd been standing your ground your whole life. He paused. Did they ever see that? Your family? Did they ever once see who you actually are? She thought about it honestly, not defensively, not with the quick answer that would end the question, but really thought about it. My mother saw it once, she said, when I was about 15. I'd managed to save the crop on the east field after a bad frost, figured out on my own how to bank the soil, worked 3 days straight. And she looked at what I'd done, and she said, "Ivy, you're something, you know that?" She stopped. And then my father came home, and she never said it again. Like saying it out loud had scared her. Like if she acknowledged what I was, she'd have to acknowledge what they'd been doing with it. Jack looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I see it." Just that, quiet and certain and without performance. She felt it move through her the way true things move, not with noise, not with drama, but with the particular gravity of something settling into its permanent place. "I know," she said. They were an hour outside of Harlan County, on the road back up the mountain, when Ivy saw the rider. He was coming down from the North Trail, fast, too fast for the terrain, the horse moving with the urgency that meant something behind the rider, not just ahead of him. She put her hand on Jack's arm. He'd already seen. The rider pulled up when he recognized Jack, a ranch hand named Feeney who worked a property 2 ridges over, a quiet, reliable man who did not ride fast without reason. "Riley," Feeney said, pulling his horse to a hard stop. He was breathing like he'd been riding for a while. "Somebody's been on your north fence line. Gaines's boy found it this morning. 3 sections cut clean. Your cattle are out on the ridge." Jack was already turning his horse. "How many head?" he said. 40, maybe 50. They didn't take them, just opened the line and let them wander." Feeney looked grim. Somebody knew what they were doing. Cut it clean, no waste. The kind of cut that says it was done to make a point, not to steal. "Walsh," Ivy said. "Or someone working for Walsh," Jack said. She looked at him. She saw it clearly. The cattle weren't taken because this wasn't about the cattle. This was a message. We can reach your land. We can reach what you've built. We can make this as expensive and exhausting as we choose. Sign the paper and make it stop. She felt something move through her that she hadn't felt before in this whole situation. Not fear, not grief, something older and harder than both. She turned her horse north, toward the ridge. "Ivy," Jack started. "I know how to move cattle," she said. "And I am not sitting at the bottom of this mountain while someone takes apart what we've been building." He looked at her for 1 second. Then he turned his horse north too. Feeney fell in behind them. They rode, and on the ridge above them, in the cooling afternoon, 40 head of cattle wandered loose through a fence that someone had cut very deliberately, on the same day that the same someone had handed them a legal document designed to make them feel powerless. But Ivy McAllister did not feel powerless. She felt, for the first time in her life, exactly the opposite. And whoever had cut that fence was about to find out what that looked like when it moved toward you. They found the first 20 head bunched at the tree line, nervous and milling, the way cattle get when they've been moved against their will and don't know where they are anymore. Feeney swung wide to the left without being asked. Jack went right. Ivy pushed straight up the middle, making the sounds and movements she'd learned on her father's farm at 14. Low, steady, deliberate. And the cattle responded the way animals always respond to someone who knows what they're doing. Not perfectly, not fast, but they responded. They worked for 2 hours. Nobody talked much. There wasn't a need to. The 3 of them moved together with a quiet efficiency of people focused on a shared problem. And somewhere in those 2 hours, sweating and dusty and entirely focused on the physical reality of 40 confused cattle on a mountain ridge, Ivy felt something clarify inside her. Walsh had cut this fence to make them feel small, to make the land feel precarious and the problem feel endless, to make Jack Riley look at what he'd built and see how easily it could be undone. Instead, she was up here on a ridge in the summer heat, driving cattle back through a gap in a fence she already knew how to repair, beside a man who hadn't once told her to let him handle it. It didn't feel precarious. It felt like hers. When the last animal was through, and Jack had strung a temporary line across the cut sections, enough to hold until morning, he stood back and looked at the fence with his hands on his hips. Feeney had already started back toward his own property, tipping his hat to Ivy as he went. 3 clean cuts, Jack said. Same tool. Someone who's done fencing work. Walsh has hired hands, Ivy said. Walsh has hired hands who know better than to put their name on something like this, he said. Which means they also know Walsh won't protect them if it comes back on them. Can Briggs use this? If we document it before morning. He turned and looked at her. Ride back down to town tonight. Show Briggs the cut line. Let him file an affidavit of interference before Walsh gets ahead of the story. That's 4 hours down and 4 hours back. I know. She looked at him steadily. And you're asking me to go because Walsh knows my face and has already decided what I am, Jack said. He doesn't know what you are yet. And Briggs will listen to you differently than he listens to me. You ask the right questions. You see the shape of things. He held her gaze. I'm not sending you. I'm asking you. There's a difference. She knew there was. She'd been learning the difference for 3 weeks now, and it still surprised her every time. All right, she said, but I'm not going alone. Martha's still at the house. Then Martha comes with me. He nodded once. And then, before she could turn the horse, he reached across the space between them and took her hand. Not a grand gesture, not a performance. Just his hand, closing around hers, brief and firm and entirely certain. Come back, he said. 3 words, no decoration. She felt them land in the center of her chest, like something that had been traveling a long way and finally arrived. I always come back, she said. Get used to it. She turned the horse south. She did not look back, but she was smiling, quietly, to herself, all the way down the first switchback. Martha Gaines, when presented with the situation, put on her coat and said, I've been waiting 20 years for someone to finally take Walsh to the carpet, and was on the wagon seat in 4 minutes flat. They made it to Harlan County in just under 3 hours, Martha driving with the focused aggression of a woman who had spent decades navigating mountain roads and had no patience for terrain that got in her way. Briggs answered his door in his vest and reading glasses, looked at them both, looked at the hour, and stepped back to let them in without asking a single unnecessary question. Ivy laid it out. The cut fence, the timing, the connection to the documents delivered by Colt Reeves that same afternoon. Briggs listened, made notes, asked 6 sharp questions, and then said, This is harassment of a property holder in active legal dispute. If we can tie the fence cutting to Walsh's office, even circumstantially, it changes the nature of this from a civil title matter to potential criminal interference. Can you tie it? Martha said. Walsh retained 2 men named Cole and Fitch last month, Briggs said. Both of them have done fencing work in this county for years. If either of those men was seen on the North Trail today. Feeney saw 2 riders on the North Trail this morning, Ivy said. He mentioned it on the ride up. I didn't think to ask him who they were. Briggs looked at her. I need Feeney's statement. I'll get it, she said. Tonight? If that's what it takes. Briggs leaned back in his chair and looked at her with the same expression he'd had in his office that morning. The recalibrating look. The man reassessing where the weight of this situation actually lived. Riley's a lucky man, he said. He worked for it, she said. Same as everything else. They got Feeney's statement by 10 o'clock that night. Feeney lived a hard 40-minute ride from Briggs' office, and he came to the door with a lamp and a rifle, and then recognized Martha and put the rifle down and said, "Lord, Martha, it's nearly midnight." "It's 10:15, Martha said. "Get dressed." Feeney's statement confirmed it. 2 riders on the North Trail before noon, Cole and Fitch, both known to him by name, both of whom he'd seen working with Walsh's people at the land office property 2 months prior. He signed the paper Briggs had prepared with the steady hand of a man who had no reason to lie and every reason to set the record straight. Briggs filed the interference affidavit at 7 the next morning, the moment the courthouse opened, before Walsh had time to get there first. By 8, the story was moving through Harlan County the way small-town stories move. Fast, with texture, everyone adding their particular knowledge to the shape of it. Walsh had overreached. Not just bent the rules in the way that people in his position had always bent them, but stepped across a line clear enough that the bending stopped looking like pragmatism and started looking like what it was. Ivy was at the counter of the dry goods store getting coffee and waiting for Martha when she heard 2 men at the next table talking about it. The Riley land claim, Walsh's document, the fence cutting, and felt the strange and specific sensation of being inside a story that had already escaped the people who thought they were controlling it. She did not correct them. She just listened. And what she heard was that the Valley's instinctive sympathy was not with Walsh. It was with the man on the mountain who had built his fence straight and kept his cattle well and asked for nothing from nobody for 9 years. That meant something. She hadn't expected to be moved by it, but she was. She got back to the property at midday. Jack was on the porch. He saw her coming up the trail and stood. A single movement, no performance. Just a man who had been waiting and was glad the wait was over. He came down the porch steps and met her at the gate, and looked at her face, and seemed to read everything he needed to know in about 2 seconds. "Briggs filed it," he said. "7 this morning," she said. "And Feeney's statement names Cole and Fitch specifically." His jaw shifted. "Walsh isn't going to like that." "Walsh is going to like what comes next even less," she said. "Briggs says the interference affidavit changes the posture of the whole thing. It's not just a title dispute anymore. It's a pattern. Survey challenge, document delivery, property interference, all in 48 hours. Briggs called it a coordinated campaign of harassment, and he's putting that language in front of a judge by end of week." Jack was looking at her the way he'd looked at her a dozen times in 3 weeks, with that particular still attention that she'd learned was how he looked at things that mattered to him. Things he was measuring, not for their utility, but for themselves. "Ivy," he said. "What?" "Thank you." She looked at him. The words were plain and direct, the same as everything he said, but they carried the weight of a man who had not had many people to thank in his life, and knew the full cost of what she'd done. "I told you we were on the same side," she said. "You did," he said. "I'm starting to believe it." "Starting to?" she said. The corner of his mouth moved, just slightly, the thing behind the smile. "Believed it for a while," he said. "Took me a minute to say it right." She let that settle. Then she looked past him at the fence line, the barn, the steady evidence of 9 years of work. "How's the north fence holding?" "Fixed it at first light," he said. "Better than it was before." "Of course you did," she said. The letter from her mother arrived 4 days later. Ivy had been expecting it, had been watching for it since the morning she'd sent her own letter down with Martha. The letter she'd written by lamplight the night they got back from Harlan County. She'd written it carefully, without anger, without the impulse to win an argument. Just the facts as she knew them, what had happened on the mountain, what her father had come to do, what she had chosen, and at the end, what she'd meant to say. The door is open, Mama. Whatever you decide about him is yours to decide. But you should know there is a room here, and you are welcome in it. She was in the kitchen when Martha brought it up with the supplies. She held it for a while before she opened it. Jack came in from the yard, saw her standing with the envelope, and stopped. From your mother? Yes. You want me to leave you alone with it? She thought about it honestly. Then she shook her head. She opened it. Vera McAllister's handwriting was small and careful. A woman who had been taught that too much space on a page was wasteful, who had applied that lesson to more than letters. Ivy read it once, quickly, then again, slowly. Her mother had not written the letter Edmund had scripted. The letter Edmund had probably expected her to write, the one about family loyalty, about what Ivy owed them, about the damage she'd done by defying her father in front of outsiders. Instead, Vera McAllister had written 4 paragraphs. The first said that she had learned from Tom Hendricks, who had apparently told his wife, who had told Vera, about the land scheme, about Walsh and the railroad, and the real reason Edmund had arranged Ivy's marriage to a man none of them knew. The second said that she had asked Edmund directly, and that Edmund had not denied it. The third was the shortest. I am ashamed, it said. Not of you, of what I allowed, of how long I allowed it. I don't have a good explanation for why. I think I stopped believing I was allowed to stop things. The fourth said, if the room is truly open, I may need it sooner than you expect. Ivy stood very still with the letter in her hands. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and pressed one hand flat against her eyes and breathed. She was not crying. She was something past crying. In the country, on the other side of it, where the grief and the relief exist at the same time without canceling each other out. Jack sat down across from her. He didn't ask what it said. He just sat there, present and steady, the same way he'd been present and steady since the afternoon she'd told him her father had sent her up here as a joke. And he'd looked at her and said, what do you think? After a while, she lowered her hand. My mother is leaving him, she said. Jack was quiet for a moment. Is she all right? I don't know yet, Ivy said. But she's choosing to find out. She folded the letter carefully, the same way Vera had folded it. She's going to need a place. Then she'll have one, he said, simply. No deliberation, no caveat. Like there had never been another possible answer. Ivy looked at him across the kitchen table. The same table where they'd sat on the first day. 2 strangers, and she'd told him what she was, and he'd listened like it mattered. 3 weeks and a storm and a legal fight and a cut fence and a midnight ride, and here they were, still at the same table, something entirely different between them now. Jack, she said. Yes. I need to ask you something directly. Go ahead. When you sent that letter to my father, she said, asking for a wife, what were you actually hoping for? He held her gaze. He didn't rush the answer, but he didn't avoid it either. I was hoping for someone real, he said. Someone who wasn't performing. Who didn't want the version of this life that looks good from a distance? Someone who wanted the actual thing. The work, the land, the winters, the problems. He paused. Someone who would sit across from me at the end of a day and mean what they said. And, she said. And I didn't expect to find her in the first wagon that came up the trail, he said quietly. I thought it would take longer. Something moved through Ivy McAllister, slow and warm and absolutely certain. It almost didn't happen, she said. My father almost sent Clara. Your father sent who he thought was worthless, Jack said. His voice was steady and deliberate. The voice he used when something mattered, and he wanted it heard right. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about everything he thought he knew about you. But in being wrong, he put exactly the right person on that wagon. His jaw shifted. I'm not grateful to him, but I'm grateful for what came off it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Ask me." He blinked. "Ask you what?" "You know what," she said. He was quiet. Then something settled across his face. The decision made, the last piece of careful thought released. "Ivy McAllister," he said. "Will you stay?" Not will you marry me, though that was in it. Not a transaction, not a legal arrangement, not the thing her father had designed and Walsh had tried to exploit and Clara had laughed at on a porch in another life. Just, will you stay? "Yes," she said. "I told you on the first day. I'm not fragile, and I'm not leaving, and I intend to be treated fairly." She held his gaze. "You've treated me fairly every single day." He reached across the table and took her hand, the same way he'd taken it on the ridge, brief and firm and certain. They stayed like that for a while, in the quiet kitchen, with the summer afternoon pressing warm through the window. The legal matter was resolved in 11 weeks. Briggs's resurvey request was approved in 63 days, exactly as he'd predicted. The corrected survey confirmed Jack Riley's title on every acre, north parcel included. Walsh's document was formally dismissed. The interference affidavit went before a circuit judge who looked at the pattern Briggs had laid out. The timing, the coordination, the names of Cole and Fitch alongside Walsh's, and issued a formal censure of the county land office that stripped Walsh of his authority to process any new title challenges without a 3-person review board. Walsh resigned 6 days later. Edmund McAllister did not attend. He had other problems by then. Vera had taken Clara and gone to stay with her sister in Abilene, and the story of what Edmund had done with his daughter's marriage had made its way through Clover Ridge with the particular velocity that small-town stories achieve when people already suspected something was wrong and are finally being given permission to say so. Edmund McAllister still had his house. He still had his debt, somewhat reduced. He had lost rather more than he'd intended when he'd sent his plain daughter up the mountain as a joke. Daniel Voss accepted a fair cash payment for a quitclaim deed 3 months after the circuit court ruling. He took the money without ceremony and left the county. Briggs said he'd never had any real appetite for a fight. He'd just been looking for an easier mark than Jack Riley had turned out to be. Jack received the confirmed clean title on a Tuesday morning. He brought the document home, set it on the kitchen table, and looked at it for a long moment. Ivy was kneading bread dough at the counter. She looked at the document, looked at his face. "Well?" she said. "It's done," he said. She wiped her hands on her apron and crossed to the table and read it herself. Both their names were on the property now. She'd had Briggs add hers the week after the circuit court ruling. Jack's suggestion, done quietly and officially. The legal confirmation of something that had already been true in every way that mattered. She set the document down. 9 years, she said. 9 years, he agreed. No more carrying it alone. He looked at her. No, he said. No more of that. Vera McAllister arrived on a Thursday in late September, when the summer heat had finally broken and the mountain air had taken on the first clean edge of autumn. She came up the trail in a hired wagon with 2 trunks and a carpet bag, and the expression of a woman who had made a hard decision and intended to stand behind it. Ivy met her at the gate. They stood facing each other for a moment, mother and daughter, all the years of it between them, the good and the insufficient and the painful. Vera looked at Ivy's face, really looked, the way she hadn't, Ivy thought, since she was 15 and had saved an east field from frost. And something moved across her mother's expression, something that had been a long time coming. "You look well," Vera said. "I am well," Ivy said. Vera's chin moved slightly. "I'm sorry," she said, "for what it's worth, for how long it took me." "It's worth something," Ivy said honestly. "It's not nothing." Vera nodded. That was what she needed, not absolution, just the truth. Jack came off the porch and shook Vera's hand and said, "The room's ready, Mrs. McAllister. Make yourself at home," and meant it in the plain and direct way he meant everything. Vera looked at him, then at Ivy, then back at him. "She always was the best of us," Vera said quietly. "I should have said it sooner." "She still is," Jack said. "Say it now." That night, after supper, after Vera had gone to her room and the house was quiet, Ivy sat on the front porch in the cooling autumn dark. The valley below had filled with shadow, the same way it had on her second night here, when she'd sat in this same spot and felt, for the first time, that she might be exactly where she was supposed to be. Jack came out and sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. He handed her a cup of coffee and didn't say anything, because he was a man who understood the difference between silence that needed filling and silence that needed keeping. She thought about the morning her mother had stood laughing in the doorway, about Clara's voice saying, "At least he won't know what he's getting," about packing that battered trunk with steady hands and a jaw that didn't tremble, riding 3 hours up a mountain toward a man she'd never met and a life she hadn't chosen. She thought about what she'd found instead of punishment. She thought about what it felt like to be seen, not despite who she was, but because of it. Completely, clearly, without performance or apology. She set her hand on Jack's, where it rested on the porch rail. He turned his hand over and held hers. "You all right?" he said. She looked out at the valley, at the dark ridgeline, at the land that had been fought for and won, and was theirs, all of it, in every way a thing could be owned. "I'm home," she said. And that was the truest thing she had ever said, and she had never been more certain of anything in her life. And the mountain held them both in its dark and generous quiet. And Ivy McAllister, the daughter they had thrown away like she was nothing, had built herself a world that no one would ever take from her again.